another episode of the Kulkarnis. This is your host and host, Sanjeev Kulkarni. And today we have with us a truly global polymath, a gem of a person, GEM, George Eby Mathew. George, welcome to Kulkarnis.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for having me.
How are you doing today, George?
Very well, thank you. It's a Friday, so can't complain.
TGIF, always the best day. So, George, so excited and so glad to have you here. We have worked as colleagues for many years, but there is always a new facet of you that I uncover or discover whenever I speak to you. So, I thought, what best way to uncover or explore that journey than on my show, Kulkarnis? And to introduce the podcast to you, this is a podcast where we explore journeys of truly passionate people. People who keep themselves inspired and pick up new passions and give equal energy and follow those paths and passions. Trailblazers, as we call them. When we converse, George, I feel that you're nothing short of a trailblazer of how many times you keep changing or picking up a new passion, if I might say, every decade. I would request if you can give a quick introduction of yourself to our audience, and then we will start unpacking your journey.
Yeah, definitely. People ask me what I've been on multiple forums around the world, and people ask you to introduce yourself and so on. Over the years, my introductions have changed. In the beginning of my life or in the initial parts of my career and so on and so forth, you start with what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But then often you realize that what you do is only a small part of who you are. So I've started to change the way I respond to that question I start by saying that I'm a full-time father, a full-time husband, and then I tell people what they do. Because 24/7, that's what you are. And your role is, whether it's a Monday or Friday or Saturday or Sunday midnight, whatever, there are some roles that you carry yourselves. Those are the two roles that I treasure the most. And then on the side, on the part-time, to keep my bills being paid, I do work. At the moment, I work for myself. For the last 9 years, I've been working for myself as a fractional consultant. I'm a chief digital and AI officer of my own company that I run. And so I do advise companies on a fractional basis on the things that I have learned along the way for over the past 30 years. So I'm an engineer by training. I've lived in 5 continents, 5 or 6 different countries, travel quite a bit on work. I was born in one culture, raised in another culture, and then started working yet in another
culture.
So, yeah, so they call us third culture kids. I'm not a kid anymore, but that's what they used to call us when we were growing.
Well, you're a kid in one way, George. I can assure you that the veracity and the pace with which you learn things, in that sense, you're definitely a kid. Always a kid at heart, always eager.
I should say always a kid at heart. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. But that sounds exciting. You said 6 different countries, and can you walk us through which were those? Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
Yeah, so there's a correction there. It's a five countries actually. Come to think of it, so I was born in India. Kerala, middle class. My parents were both teachers, and then they decided to move to Africa. So they initially went to Ethiopia in the 1970s, and then they moved to Nigeria in the end of the 70s, so early East. So I spent my childhood from when I was 3 till about 15 African countries. Specifically those African countries.
So the formative years were all in Africa in a way.
That's correct. Yes. And that gives you a totally different perspective as well, right?
Yes.
So moving from India to Nigeria, where my schooling, the years of that you typically go to school, I was in those African countries. And then we moved back to India when my brother and I and my sister, we were at least older. The 2 of us were the oldest. My brother and I were to join year 11 and 12. And we continued year 11 and 12 in India. And then we did, our respective professional courses and what have you. And then worked in India, then moved overseas again to Canada and then here to Australia. And in that process, also traveled to multiple countries. So even as a child, I used to travel with my parents. So as a child, we traveled to Europe. We traveled to many countries in Africa as well.
Wow.
And then when we started working, of course, work took us to different countries as well, to multiple countries in Europe and Asia and North America. Of course, there are a couple of places that I still need to visit. The South American continent is something I haven't been there. And of course, the North Pole and South Pole.
Antarctica, that's we're just a hop away from Antarctica, so we'll probably get there soon sometime. But North Pole is far.
And that's on the bucket list for sure.
Yes, absolutely. But tell us a little bit about Africa. They say that, with whatever little I know, they call it as probably where life began in a way. And and futuristically speaking as well, there is a lot of potential in Africa. But how was it growing there in the 70s, 80s, especially you coming from India, Africa? How did they compare, if at all?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stereotypical representation of Africa, and I think my experience was totally the opposite. The first thing that you realized, again, remember in the 1970s, India was still not in the liberalized economy. We had restrictions, so we had one car, which was the ambassador car, that was sort of a hand-me-down from 1940s down to, till 1980s. My father had a second hand or a third hand, I think, ambassador Mark IV, it was called.
Mhm.
And so India was very closed in itself. So, I mean, as an economy, as you will recognize, whereas Africa at that time was very progressive. So you
Oh,
had open markets. Like, for example, I remember I've got childhood memories from Ethiopia where we lived. No, a lot of people didn't have cars at that time as much, because that's probably a similarity. But then when we moved to Nigeria, we had pretty much everything that you now have in the brands that you're associated with, like Coca-Cola or
okay.
Nike or what have you. And they had plenty of it compared to what we
India
did
had it at that time.
in India. Like, for example, television channels was just one in India. Whereas growing up in Nigeria, we had access to multiple channels. We had access to supermarkets. We were not used to seeing supermarkets in India at that time. These were all, in the late 70s and early 80s. Whereas you had those. You had imported cars that we drove, whether it is French Peugeot or Toyotas or what not. And so we were exposed to all of those, what we call the consumer economy. So the perceptions and the connections were very different.
Mhm.
And of course, Africa had its own challenges. That development was in pockets. So cities were very well developed.
Okay.
Roads were the best. I have more memories of Nigerian roads than the Ethiopian roads because I was very young when I was in
Young
Ethiopia.
when you
I think I left when I was about 6 or 7. So my memories kind of very faded. But I do
Mm.
remember that in Ethiopia, we would go to the hot springs as for picnics as families. And that was unique because, this is basically springs channel into, your the resorts that you live in, so on and so forth.
Of course.
And then I still remember going to vineyards and cutting our own bunch of grapes.
Grapes. Okay.
And so those memories still linger. And then my first experience with Lego was in Ethiopia. There in Addis Ababa, my dad once went on a business trip, and then he brought bucket loads of Lego. And I
Legos.
don't know whether the Lego sets.
Yeah, of course. And then you
are in
start
buckets as well.
building them.
Yeah, and you've got different things. I still remember getting. I think this was just in the early 70s. The Apollo 11 launch was celebrated at that time, and so we had a rocket set fully
Mhm.
made of Lego. This is one of the childhood memories I have from Ethiopia. In India, you could never buy Lego at that time, right?
Yeah, of course.
So
And sorry, I was just about to say that Lego these days, what the kids get is kind of pre-made in a way. It says that this is the model that you're trying to build. Here are your Lego sets. But I
Correct.
believe back in the days, it used to be Lego, build whatever you want, right? So it's like you just have the various bricks together.
Yeah, both. So we had both. So the Apollo 11, replica was, you're building an Apollo rocket launcher, with the multiple stage rockets,
Mhm.
and labeling it NASA and all of that stuff
Wow.
on Lego. And this is I'm talking 1975, 76.
Mhm.
So those are distinct memories that we've had in
Of Ethiopia. And by
of
the way, I was about
Ethiopia.
to test my memory, but you just mentioned that. I can assure you, Addis Ababa was the capital I had for Ethiopia. So
Correct.
that is the capital of Ethiopia, and Nigeria, I believe, is Lagos.
Lagos, that's correct.
Lagos. Right.
And the other thing to remember, in the 1970s, Ethiopia was a fantastic country to live in. And so we were so there was a transition that was happening between Emperor Haile Selassie, and then there was a regime change. And then I think the communists came in, and things changed from there. And then you started to hear about famine in Ethiopia and so on. And those are things that we couldn't even relate to because even though we lived there, we didn't relate to those posters that we all grew up with.
Things
The
change so fast.
interesting thing was this is again coming back to memory, right? So Haile Selassie was the emperor. He was assassinated. He had a lion as a pet, and so there was stories about him and his pets, and we grew up around those stories. And one of the accusations against him was that he would give biscuits and cakes, cake
To the lion.
to the line. Yeah. And so that was one of the accusations that being in the communist ideology, you're living a luxurious life because you're in the upper echelons. So that's one of the distinct memories that I have. But the reason why I talked about Haile Selassie was that years later, when I went to engineering college in Kerala, I went to a college called Mar Athanasius Engineering College, which is one of the 5 colleges that we had in Kerala, which was open merit and what have you. So I was posted there. But interestingly, the hostel that I went to was actually named HS1 and HS2, standing for Haile Selassie I and Haile Selassie II.
Wow.
And the backstory was that the Ethiopian emperor was part of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and the management of the college that I was going to was also part of the Indian Orthodox Church. And the story goes that he came in the 70s and laid the foundation stone for those 2 hostel blocks that I eventually went to.
Talk about that was being a full circle.
Yeah, it was weird in a way, but there was also a connection. But see, for me, there was a personal connection. For the rest of the students who study there,
it didn't mean probably
no connection, right? Because I knew who Haile Selassie was growing up.
Correct.
So that was a distinct memory from Ethiopia. And I used to speak the Amharic language very well.
That's what I was about to come to next, culture as part of language and food, especially. So let's get into that part.
Yeah, correct. So they spoke Amharic, which is a very unique language, I would say. I can't I remember many of those words that I used to speak very, very fluently, I believe. And in terms of foods, that the Ethiopian foods that we remember there was injera, which is basically that chapati roti type of bread, which is eaten with chicken curry, and they call the chicken is called doro in Ethiopian language, right? In Amharic, and they make a soup with it, curry types.
Correct.
With it, and here in Sydney, you have Ethiopian restaurants.
Correct.
So I could relate to that, and I could enjoy it because I had that childhood taste ingrained.
Childhood memories coming back. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, correct. So there is a connection with the Ethiopian people from that perspective. So whenever I meet them and have a conversation, I'll say, "Oh, my dad worked in Asmara, which was the first place that my dad worked initially."
Is it close to the capital Addis Ababa, or where does it sit from a map perspective?
Not really. So Asmara is part of Eritrea. So Eritrea is a separate country now. So so that's basically the Horn of Africa. Just to the coast. So Eritrea is now a separate country, but Asmara was the capital of Eritrea at that time. But back then it was part of Ethiopia. But then we moved to a place called Ambo, which is 40 kilometers near Addis Ababa. That was home for us. So that's my Ethiopian story.
Wow. And then I want to ask you 2 parts. One is, how did Nigeria happen? And tell us a few things about that. And secondly, how was schooling in all this? I mean, was language ever a concern for you, or was it all English schooling, given that your parents were also teachers? Or
Yeah, correct. My parents were teachers, so they were part of a school, but then they were in higher secondary schools, whereas our needs were primary. So we never went to school in Ethiopia because we were all under 6 or 7, the schooling age. So we never needed that. But when we moved to Nigeria, the reason why we moved to Nigeria was that my parents worked for the government in establishing schools. So their contract was with the state governments of Nigeria, and therefore they posted them in places where they need to develop everything from curriculum to setting up best practices and what have you. So both my parents were involved in that. So in saying that, we were posted in different towns, cities, and also upcoming areas. So some of the places we went to never had a proper schooling infrastructure for us. We found ourselves too young to go to a secondary school. And so what we ended up doing was that my parents are significant, that are risk takers of a different kind, I would think, and which is probably one of the other characters that I have imbibed from them. So my parents decided to homeschool us. So we were homeschooled in Nigeria. What that meant for them was that there was no blueprint for homeschooling. Now it's fashionable. You have curriculums, you have social events that homeschoolers can go to, and so on and so forth. But my parents had no blueprint. And so they took a big risk to basically say, okay, now we're going to homeschool you guys. So I've got my brother, myself, my older brother, myself, and my younger sister. My younger sister was much younger, so there's a 4-year gap. So she was a baby. She was a toddler when we moved to Nigeria. But the long and short of it was that, so we were homeschooled We did try to go to regular school wherever we could when they were transferred to different places, but it was a very mixed bag. So I remember going to year 2 and 3, I think, in one place, which had a school.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably the introductory experiences to school was in year 2.
Oh, okay. Because you were moving so frequently and yeah.
Correct.
And
Year
was it
2
an
and year
English
3.
school, or is
Correct.
English the prevalent language there when it comes to education, or is it more the local language?
That's a very good question. Very interestingly, most of the African schools are based on English language.
English language. Hmm.
And in fact, our experience with Nigeria was that most people spoke very, very, very good English.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there were some Nobel Prize winners as well from Nigeria who's for literature, English literature.
Oh, wow.
And so their quality of language for grammar and so on and so forth, it's top notch from our experience. And also the scholarship that comes from Nigeria is pretty intense and deep.
Mm.
And so school was not a regular experience for us. So I remember year 2, year 3 partly, and then year 6, I think we did. And then we stopped going to school. I think we did year 7 briefly, because year 7 was a higher secondary school.
Right.
And
parents.
where my parents taught as well.
Hmm.
So I still remember sitting in my mom's class on social studies. one.
And what was it like? Were you like, the teacher's son and special treatment, or, you just wanted to hide somewhere?
It's a bit odd, right? At that age, you want to hide away from your parents.
Correct.
Because, so yeah, so there was the bit of that. But the other thing was that we were the only foreign students in the class. So
Okay.
my brother, so at some point in life, my brother and I, or my parents decided that we should probably sit in the same class because we were kind of isolated. So one child in one class and the other. So we decided to do it. So I got a 1-year promotion. Yeah. So I've always sat in my brother's class.
So basically, your brother is the elder one, you're in between, and your sister is the youngest.
Correct.
Right.
So I sat in my brother's class. So even though I was one year and a bit younger, so I had that double promotion, and so that went through all through life. So I finished my year 10 or 10th, as we call it here, when I was 13 years old. So I finished graduation year 10 when I was 13, and therefore I had that advantage when I went to university. I was the youngest in the class, so that one year advantage was there all through because of those childhood years in Nigeria.
So here's another thing we have to thank your parents for. This is probably why you are ahead of your times at all times.
Well, I think my parents were significant risk takers because my dad going to Africa in the 1970s. Think about it. There was no cell phone. My mom didn't have any contact with him for 6 months, and that's unfathomable, right? I mean, we can't stay apart from each other as families and people for 6 minutes, let alone. So there is that. So that's one level of risk that my dad took, and so that became part of my DNA as well. Eventually, to say, if my dad could do it, I could do it in my time.
Absolutely.
To go and embrace the unknown, for example, and then as far as my mom was concerned, she was also a risk taker in that she decided to homeschool us.
How was that experience? In the sense, like, can you elaborate a bit more on that part? Like you said, there was no syllabus per se. So did you all get to stretch your boundaries in terms of what you were studying? Your parents, of course, coming from the faculty or coming from the teaching background, they broadly would have a very good sense of how to train you, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the good thing about homeschooling is that you get to study what you like, and there's nobody telling you what you need to. So the not so good thing is that you miss out a lot of things that your peer groups would know. Like, for example, if I grew up in India, I would know a lot about the Indian history and all of that. But by the way, I know because I was curious to find out.
Correct.
And I've read up about Gandhi and our freedom struggle and all of that from an Indian perspective because, I'm natively Indian by birth. And because you wanted to have conversation in society, you learned all of that, read up yourself on your own time, but it was not imposed on us.
Correct.
So there was pros and cons to it. The pros were that we get to choose what we like to study. And so for the first 5-6 years of our schooling age, we never had any curriculum. But then we decided that because we are coming back to India, you needed to have some kind of a transitionary bridge to fit into the Indian education system, which is largely driven by physics, chemistry, math, and biology kind of streams, or commerce streams, or social studies, social subjects, and what have you.
Right.
So you had to kind of bridge. For that, we basically chose an international curriculum. It was called GCE at that time, General Certificate of Education. I think it's now called GCSE, which is
Mm-hmm.
run by University of Cambridge and University of London. It's available internationally, so you subscribe to that syllabus. You learn them at your pace, and then you appear for exams, and they basically give you a certificate that is recognized worldwide for you to continue. So that's what we did in the latter half of our schooling years.
But when you were growing up, when you were doing those early years of homeschooling, do you remember what was your favorite subject and what you would run away from? Well, no run
Yes,
away in a way you explained. Probably there's no running away because, you just wouldn't do that subject. But what is it that you did not like?
because we were not part of a structured program, there were gaps in our own understanding and ability to kind of fit into a routine. But the beauty of these curriculums was that rote learning was discouraged everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to basically learn about practical applications of whether it's maths or physics or chemistry.
Nice.
And you're tested very differently. So our upbringing, training as children were not to buy hard things and stuff like that, but to apply concepts early on. So that was a big, big plus for us. The other thing was about freedom with our time. We never had to get up in the morning and rush and, find school uniforms and pack your bags and so on and so forth. Because my parents lived on the campus, on the school campus, and the school campus, the school is a school community. It's a gated community. In some of the places we lived in, we had our own electricity and water generation. Water supply and electricity generation because it was very remote or new townships that we're building.
Mm-hmm.
We moved in. Schools were set up even before public infrastructure was set up. So the gated communities were self-contained.
Right.
So the benefit for that is that my parents did not have commute either. So they walked to school from there.
So they were very close to you in a way. Right.
Correct. And so that meant that there was no commute growing up. We never understood what commuting was till we started working or till we started going to school in India, right?
School in India.
So you had to wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning, get your bags and pack your things, and taking lunch to school, for example, was very alien to us. That's why even I don't take lunch even now when I go to work. It's a very foreign.
Very interesting. That's very unique in a way. One thought that's coming to me, George, is that how do you bring in discipline then? From the way I know you, you're fairly disciplined and you're fairly self-driven. But at this earlier age, if you have no boundaries, one of the important things that school does is helps discipline kids in a way, right? Because kids can bundle of energies, they can be going anywhere. So it helps to discipline them. How was that part for you if it was just you and your brother at home?
So we didn't have kind of a calendar driving our days, but we had a notional sense of what our day would look like. Because we didn't have to wake up so early doesn't mean that we didn't have to wake up. So we would be up by about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. But then our house was surrounded by things to learn. So my dad was the head of the department for biology. So he would have experiments that he would be running for the school. Some of it will be at home, and he would take our help to basically prepare them. Whether it is insects modeling or drawing some of those anatomy of the human anatomy, for example, he would give us those assignments and tasks for us to do as teaching aids for him to actually teach.
Wow.
So we helped our dad in that way. So we learned as well in the process. I still remember my dad was also the chief examination officer for the school. So which meant that all the exams, he had responsibility to run them. And especially when it came to experiments for chemistry, biology, or physics, there were these props and, things that he had to do, which came to us. I still remember one exam, 1 year, the exam was basically for biology they had to describe the parts of a rabbit skeleton. So my dad had to create the specimens of rabbits for the school for about 300 students or sorts.
Wow.
So we had the responsibility to get the rabbits processed at home, and we had to remove the flesh from the rabbit's skeleton so that we can expose the skeleton, right?
Wow. Talk about real experiments here.
That's right. So imagine, I'm just reflecting on some of those things.
Yeah.
So imagine having because the head, for example, had to be intact, right? So the bones cannot be broken. And so you have to maintain the bone structure of a full rabbit. And students had to basically label them or draw them as part of their exam. And this had to be done in top secrecy, right? So my parents, for my dad, we were part of the crew for him because we did that at home away from the students because we still lived in the campus.
Correct.
You couldn't reveal the specimens to anyone, right? Because it's
So you had other
confidential.
friends there. Yeah.
But
Beautiful.
so we had to prepare that. So for example, we learned the whole rabbit skeletal system. We knew what vertebrae were. We knew the femur and I can't remember some of those
All of
terminologies now, but
them.
the names for the bones
Correct.
when we were like 9 or 10, right? So we did that at home. And my brother had this passion for wiring the skeleton in such a way that he made a model, like you see in a museum. So we did that at home. And my mom was in charge of the library, the school library. And she would bring books, check out books on her own name for us to read. So there were some interesting books. And our interest for science came from the types of books that my parents brought. Because my dad was a science teacher. My mom was an English and
teacher.
economics teacher.
They taught economics at school there. I mean, that like
Correct.
the 7th, 8th grade type. So wow, amazing, very nice.
So I did economics in my year 10 because my mom was teaching science.
Now, George, I think I'm loving this conversation, and I'm already seeing the impact that these early stage, if I may call it, education templates, and how that has had an impact on you in terms of, as you were telling me about the whole rabbit story, what was running in my head was that you can get to the bare bones pretty fast. Right? Of any complex topic that is thrown at you, you are able to get to the bare bones of it pretty fast.
That's right. So the other examples were that I still remember going to the pond to collect tadpole eggs. And we had to document the whole progress of a tadpole from the egg to the full frog for my dad. And my brother was good at sketching, so he would draw the whole life sequence.
Correct.
And then we would do the similar with butterflies. So we had to go looking for citrus butterflies, looking for orange plants, tangerine plants. And we knew how to identify butterfly eggs. And we would bring that and put it in jars and watch it grow, document how it. And we were not part of school, but we were doing that.
You knew all of that. Beautiful. And as a TA, I mean, I thought you had a different first job, and we'll come to that. But looks like your first job was actually a TA to your dad.
Correct. Yeah, so we were supporting our dad. And then there was a time when my dad bought us a book on batteries. What is that called? Batteries, bulbs, and batteries and bulbs. Magnets, bulbs, batteries. It was a ladybird book, that thick, thin. That is how we got interested in physics and electricity and things like that. So we used to make electric motors at home.
Experimented at home and...
Yeah, so we actually made an electric rotor at home, winding copper wires on a Coke, a bottle Coke cap. Wrapped it up, magnets, and it worked. Yeah. We were, 9 or 10. And so we did similarly. We made windmills. We made other things at home. So homeschooling has got its many, many advantages.
Absolutely.
The only thing we missed was the social interaction with other kids of our age.
Yeah.
Other than the kids we had in the school campus. And sometimes you are lucky to have kids of the same age in the campus of other teachers' kids. And the other teachers are all internationals. We had friends who were Sri Lankan. We had people from the UK. There were Canadian students who would come and teach for a time. Our neighbor was British. The other neighbor was Filipino. At the back was Sri Lankan. There were Ghanaians. There were pretty much international community in these schools. So we had exposed.
And that's also another way of learning, because you're exposed to so many cultures as well, right? And at the same time.
Correct. And there was also some homogeneity in the sense that all of them were, university trained, and they were brought in that, in a similar kind of environment. So all of them had challenges like us, being away from home and disconnected from families and what have you. So so growing up in the formative years, I think taught us a lot of things, like, for example, embracing change.
Yeah.
Because we moved so much and had to readjust every time, change was not an issue for us.
Yeah.
So
change was a normal, change is the only normal.
Correct. And my parents always said that, we might have to move from this house in 2 years or 3 years. So we never set anchor. Every time we had to think about planting a tree or, doing something for ourselves, like, around the house, my parents would say, we will be moving very soon. So make sure that, you don't feel so attached to things.
All right. Now, one thought that is coming to me, George, is that roughly about 100 years before you, I know of another Indian person who was born in India, went to Africa, and then returned back to India and got his independence and independence for all of us. I see that you're also born in India, went to Africa, and then came back to India and got your independence in a way. So how was that journey and experience, coming back, the subsequent part of the studies, and then the whole world opening up for you from a work perspective and so on?
Way different scales from the reference that you're making about Gandhi going back. Where is Gandhi and where I am? Look, there's no way that we can compare the two stories in terms
The
of the
graph
impact
is
that we
similar.
create.
Let's ignore the achievements for a minute, but the graph, at least this way, is similar.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, I think there were a few challenges for us to come to when we came to India. We had challenges in adjusting to the school system, which was a big issue.
All of you
I
returned,
still
or
remember.
was it just you and your brother for your studies?
No, the entire family returned because
Entire
my
family
parents
returned.
decided that 11th and 12th should be in India. And by the way, by that time, both my brother and I, we were in the same class, right?
Same
So
class, yeah.
our growth and our needs was similar. And so 11th and 12th, we came back to Kerala. I went back to our ancestral home, stayed there. And then we got into a school nearby for our 11th and 12th.
Mhm.
The school was a great school. It was, private school, as in India, most schools are private schools.
Most good, yeah, correct.
At least the most good schools are private schools. And so we went to one of those schools, and the first year was really challenging, right? From every perspective, we had to figure out uniforms, and we had to come to the school early for assembly, and so the adjustment into that kind of a life was one challenge. But the other challenge was also the method of learning, right? So I still remember my marks tanked in the first year because I was unable to understand. Learned mathematics very differently from what we would have been trained and coached on.
And if you don't mind me asking, was your brother facing similar challenges, or he had a little bit of an edge being the older one?
No, so I think we had similar challenges, but my brother had a love for a very curious mind and a love for the sciences. So he did a lot more because he's very logical in his thinking, and so he had probably a different, trajectory to mine from that perspective. Yeah. But both of us did very well, and that's what we realized. Even though we struggled in the first year, the second year onwards, we started to crack the code.
Evened out, yeah, absolutely. And did you ever feel that age was a challenge at all for you? I mean, your brother was at least the same age, but you were definitely much younger.
Not really. I never felt age was against me. I was a disadvantage. Maybe I was naive and didn't bother about what people thought about me at that time. But look, never. I don't think it was an issue at all.
Beautiful. Okay. So then that you said you did your engineering subsequently in India, yes?
That's correct. So I finished my year 12 CBSE, that was Central Board of Secondary Education. And then I sat for the entrance examinations, a public competitive examination for engineering. And
they used to have that in those days. Was it only in Kerala or everywhere?
I think it was everywhere, but I had to, because Kerala was competitive because we only have 5 engineering colleges and everyone wanted to be an engineer.
Correct.
And so that was very, very competitive. I think there were 150,000 students that were sitting in for the exam, and there were only 1,500 seats or something like that. So it's very competitive. And fortunately, I cracked that. And my brother went to the biology stream, and he decided to take agriculture sciences because he didn't want to go to medicine or dentistry, although he qualified for some of those courses, but he decided to do agriculture engineering. And that's part of the history.
That's wonderful. What happened after that is also equally intriguing, George. I think being a 80s, 90s kid studying engineering, fairly stereotypical so far. But what you did after that is very different. Can you enlighten us on that?
Yeah, correct. So when I was when I was doing my engineering, I developed this interest for writing. I don't know what triggered that, but I think there was someone in my college who asked me to write an article for the college magazine. I think that's how it started. And then by that time, my sister was specializing. So she was in, I think, year 11, year 12, and she took languages out of interest. And then she one day decided to appear for some essay competitions. And so she wrote essays. And then she came and asked me whether I can actually type it for her. Remember, this is pre-computer.
Typewriters,
My father had a typewriter. And I never studied typing, but, I learned to type on the typewriter. So during my holidays, I would get myself, experience on the typewriter.
Right.
And so she said, can you type it for me? And I wrote her his essay and I posted it. She posted it. And I said, this is interesting. So I should also try this. And so I also started writing those essays and started sending. And I don't know whether there was a magazine called Competition Success Review where you can actually...
Yes, CSR.
It's called CSR, yeah. And you could submit your essays. And then I submitted 4 or 5 essays and all of them got the top 10 prize.
Wow.
And I had no idea where, oh, wow. So there's some talent there. And I didn't know that I had that.
Hmm.
So I got interested and I started writing to the letters to the editors to the newspapers as well. The English newspaper, it was Indian Express at that time,
Mhm.
on different things that I saw on television, right? On one program, I would send a review or a critique or whatever, and they publish everything.
Hmm.
So I thought to myself and said, oh, look, looks like I've got the ability to string words together.
Hmm.
So that's when I realized that I had the ability to write. And so I did apply for a job with the Indian Express as a sub-editor after my engineering in 1993, graduated in 1993, and then applied. And this was for a computer publication that they were just launching as part of the business publication division out of Bombay. I wrote it, and the editor called me. They had about 13 or 14 people. They were surprised that an engineer would apply for that job, because usually for journalism, people who are graduates in mass communication or
Exactly.
literature would. And there was this editor who was thought out of the box, because I wrote in my covering letter that I am an engineer, and so you might be thinking that this is just a side gig for me, but I want to really look at a profession in this space if I can and combine my engineering with this. And so I said, if selected, I would commit to spending at least a couple of years giving my best to this role. And I think the editor loved that statement, because I was thinking ahead and thinking probably what he was thinking, that this is a stopgap arrangement. I was trying to get a gig in. And I became a journalist. My first appointment was a reporter sub-editor for Indian Express. It was a very good position from a journalism perspective, because Indian Express was one of the most respected publications at that time. So I started as a cub reporter. I thought I was going to be a sub-editor on the desk, but they said, there are few sub-editors, you need to be on the field. And I went on the field very reluctantly, but I did very well there. So I used to have scoops. I used to even compete with the dailies, the Economic Times, the Business Standard at that time. They were all English dailies, and who had the advantage. And I was working for a weekly, just for context.
Yeah.
And I would still break stories that they couldn't break as a journalist.
So for the uninitiated, can you help us understand what you mean by a daily versus weekly, other than, of course, one is every day, one is every week, but.
Yeah. So the thing is that because the news cycle is daily, you have faster time to market if you work for a week, right? So for a journalist, getting your byline is the pinnacle of your success. It's like the equivalent to revenue in sales that you and I were looking at later in life, right? So if you get your byline, then that you have achieved significantly in your profession. And so for weeklies, if I get a story today, I can actually publish it. Sorry, for a daily, if I got a story today, I can publish it tomorrow. Weekly, I have to wait for my print cycle, which is next week.
And then somebody could have already published that story or broken that story by then. Correct.
Somebody could have. Yeah, that's right. And so I was able to break stories like that. I was national stories, front page stories, and so on and so forth. And that gave a lot of confidence to my own family, because I still remember my grandfather was very upset that I went to take a journalist job after doing engineering. After spending 4 years, he said, "Why would you do that?" I said, "Because I was passionate about writing and I wanted to make a difference." And so I started getting front page news in the publication that I was working for, which was called Express Computer, by the way. Headline: I used to break stories on the national budgets. Indian economy was just opened up in 1991. So there was a lot of foreign investments coming from IBM and Compaq and all of that. So I used to cover that. I used to get front row seats to cover those stories of new companies that were set up. Infosys was just launching at that time, I remember. They had just bought a parcel of land, and they called a press conference. And at that
time,
time,
Kionics in Bangalore.
That's correct. So I covered that as a journalist. So we were taken on a bus, and Murthy walked us through, the campus and showed us different things. And I had the privilege of, seeing that first time, right? Because, as journalists, you get to see what's happening. I still remember the biggest news at that time in 1991, 92, 93 was setting up a 64 kilobyte per second microwave link. So every company was setting up, and somebody would up it by saying, and we've gone to 128, KB.
That was a huge achievement. Yeah.
I think it was
a big floppies. Floppies had not made it yet, I believe. Floppies were still not there. PC had not arrived by then.
No, PCs were there. PCs were
or
there.
At least the Windows. I mean, the Windows 95 was what really made it popular for all of us. So that had not come. Yeah.
That's right. So I was able to follow those tracks. My specific beat was Intel. I used to follow all the microprocessor journeys. I used to look at specialist software like CAD and CAM and all of that. But I think that was one of the best decisions I made in life, was to basically take up a job as a journalist in an industry that I was later to work and build a career in. How so, if you might ask, is that when you were 23, 24, getting exposure to the senior leadership of those companies was special.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a journalist, we never spoke to anybody below a vice president or a general manager of a company that we were interviewing. So it's either the CEO or the CEO minus one of all the top companies in the country. So if it was Infosys, it was Narayan Murthy, it was Wipro, it was Azim Premji, or someone in his team. There was Microland at that time, which was a very big contender. There was Srigar Reddy of Sonata from
Bangalore.
one of those companies. And then, of course, there were the overseas multinational companies, so IBM, Compaq. I remember, I think the CEO of Compaq was Eckhard Pfeiffer, and I interviewed him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Compaq is no longer there. Eckhard Pfeiffer is no longer there, but that story still sticks with me. The whole journey, right, of how Dell came into the picture and dominated the desktop space eventually.
Yeah.
And so that really set me up for my career later. So the best decision I think I would have made in my life was to basically become a journalist immediately after engineering, and then later follow that passion towards the industry after having learned almost from a fire hose.
If I can put it this way, George, I believe, and we have just probably come to this part of your journey, there is much more. But what I believe is that every decision has been great. I'm sure there would be probably some that you might look back and reflect in another way. But the point I'm getting at is that, yes, the journalism one might have probably been the most impactful or defining in a way. I just have one more question on the journalism part. It takes, I mean, even today with our age and experience, if we were put in front of a CEO, probably there'll be some nervous jitters that we would have. But as a young, early 20s grad, how was it? I mean, did you ever have any butterflies in your stomach, or you had a certain level of confidence? And part two of the question is, which one do you distinctly remember where you were nervous as an interviewer?
So there's always some trepidation depending on who you're meeting and so on. And first of all, they're all in their suit and perfume and whatnot, and you're in your t-shirt and sloppy and jeans and what have you, right?
This is pre Steve Jobs days.
That's right. This is, and that was how the culture was. And so again, our publication was in a startup mode, right? Our culture was very startup. So I remember the routine was very interesting. Before I answer that specific question, is that I would sleep in the office, and once the t-shirt gets dirty and needs a wash, throw that and go across the street and buy a new t-shirt for $200, and go to the nearest, hotel. And again, you have a press badge, so you could walk in anywhere. So go and brush your teeth, have breakfast, and never go home in 2-3 days, right? And that was how life was.
Yeah.
And so there was a naive sense of confidence as well. But I still remember there was some instances where I struggled to frame questions in a press conference when they ask you a question. I mean, nowadays, you see that in television, the questions are very crisp and sharp and whatnot. So I struggled with that initially, for sure. I mean, because I never had any training in that. So I had to come up with my own. So one of the one of the techniques that I've developed, which I knew helped me, was usually when you ask a question in public, the response is also given in public to everybody in the room who are
Correct.
fellow journalists. And we're competing with some of those journalists. So one of the techniques that I developed was that I would go and ask my questions in private to some of the people in the press conference. And that is how I used to get my scoop.
Yeah, correct.
So I had to develop one-on-one skills to be able to engage in small talk, get them interested, and then ask a question, which became a skill set that I developed over time. Although initially it was very hard to go and introduce yourself and then start that conversation. But because you're in a press conference, they are more amenable to talk to you. So I took advantage of those kind of scenarios. But look, it was not easy. But when I went and did stories of my own, like a feature, for example, I had all those questions already planned out. And by the way, the internet was just coming. So you had to do a lot of research in libraries. So I had to go to the local library and then look at Time magazine or Fortune magazine to realize, what Compaq is doing or Intel is doing, and then take notes physically. And it's not as sophisticated as it is today, right? Today we have an iPhone. You can just use that to record.
Jot down. Correct.
Those days you are very rudimentary. So there was a lot of those challenges that you had to be good at what you do, and to hone your skills. But to answer your question, yes, there were trepidation, especially when I still remember sitting in front of IBM, and IBM's senior vice president for Asia Pacific was probably running, but billions of dollars of business, and going there to interview him was not
Like
easy.
a one-on-one?
One-on-one, yeah. Yeah. So, and they sit in a corner office and what have you, and then you've just woken up from sleep in your office, and there's a lot of that, but a lot of them were very courteous as well, because journalists are treated differently. But at the same time, because I was an engineer, I could also understand and relate to some of the technical terms. So I was not, and of course, the preparation really helps.
So you were not superficial in a way. You would ask deep questions in that sense. I can see a circle, and we'll come to it shortly. But it's very interesting how you did all these interviews with the NRNs and Narayan Murthys of Infosys and IBM, and then later in life you worked for them. But before we come to that phase, one thing that is running in my head, I'm visualizing this, George, right? I mean, you in those days, the way you even outlined yourself, I'm visualizing somebody who probably had long unkempt hair, wouldn't bother to shave or cut his hair, and would just be in some jeans and a t-shirt with the glasses like this. Is this a fair representation of George back then? Curious George.
I think that's a fair representation, because my wife tells me of that black dark jacket that I had, which was, I can't remember what it was made of. She mentions that's the first jacket, that's the first outfit that she saw me in. Yes, absolutely, all of that, beard and unshaved, and probably I didn't have long hair that much, but never cared. They never cared about how I looked. I always valued what I had to say at a much higher premium than the way I presented myself. And I know
Absolutely.
as I grew older, I realized that people, lay a lot of emphasis on how you presented yourself and carry yourself, which all eventually came in my growth as a person. Correct. But when you're in your 20s, who cared about how you looked? And I think I was probably more confident that night I needed to be, and that really helped me as well. To get ahead in my journey.
Wonderful. Look, what I feel is that maybe this kind of journalism, the days of print journalism, all of this was a stereotype of how a journalist would be, right? Now that we have gone into the digital media or television, is when the whole look and the appearance has taken precedence. Good or bad, I won't comment, but that's what it is. Correct. Okay, so you definitely kept your promise of sticking on to the job for a couple of years, but then what you did after that is again equally interesting. So what was driving you in that direction? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that you see when you're in journalism, you have exposure to a whole range of wide-ranging understanding of the industry. So I knew what software companies did and what hardware companies did. Networking was a big thing at that time. I still remember Sun Microsystems used to have this tagline saying network is the computer, because that was, and then the home computers came in and then said home is where the PC is. And I still remember the thing different from my Apple and whatnot. And then you also found that there was analyst companies that were supporting the buyers and the sellers of technology. So Gartner was one, Forrester was there, Meta Group was there. I don't think Meta still is there. There was a company called Aberdeen Group. There was a bunch of analysts, very influential. So in my mind, I always wanted to work for Gartner. But Gartner was not in India. Gartner was overseas. So I got this opportunity. One of those trips to interview someone. There was a public relations person with me who organized the whole thing, and she also worked for an ad agency that was actually putting a recruitment ad for Gartner. Gartner's first set of people in India. That's how I came to know that the Gartner is hiring. So I sent word through her that I'm interested in the job. And they said, why should we hire you? Because Gartner was looking for people who had the network, the relationship, and also the ability to kind of do ground level research. So in my interview, I said, if you're hiring anyone, you should probably hire a journalist, because we know people. We have a good relationship with a number of target companies that you're trying to access. I can probably get you that meeting before anyone else you hire from the ground, because we are used to doing that all the time. And so he was convinced, and he hired me as a country analyst. And so that's how I moved into Gartner Group. It was called Gartner Group at that time. Now it's Gartner. At that time, it was also not fully Gartner. There was a Gartner subsidiary. They were in a joint venture, and I joined the joint venture, and then the joint venture became Gartner. And so I had
in different countries, they had a different JV of sorts, or?
Correct. So in India, it's notice all the multinationals would come in initially through a partnership, and then they acquired the partners. So that's the strategy Gartner followed as well. So I worked with the partner first, and then the company was hired, and I did about three years with Gartner in Mumbai and Bangalore. And so from journalism, which is about writing and finding out news and trends, I wrote news and analysis. In Gartner, I wrote analysis and then substantiated that with data and back that up. And I developed the skill to basically identify trends and shape public opinion because of that training that I received from Gartner.
Beautiful. And then the Infosys journey starts.
That's right. And then the Infosys journey starts. And that is interesting as well, because when Infosys had a division called Software Engineering and Technology Labs, became Infosys Labs, which had a lot of very senior deep techies with deep understanding of the software industry. And I had none of that. I've never coded in life. But one of the challenges that Infosys at that time in the this is 2000s I'm talking of, 2001, facing was their ability to communicate the value proposition to senior execs on the buy side, because everyone was willing to buy the technology and the quality of the software that was exported, all of that. But there was a perceived gap in the value propositions of these solutions. And most Indian companies were still doing body shopping. In other words, you basically hired people from India instead of from the US who were considered cheaper at that time.
Correct.
And the cost arbitrage was the main value proposition. So Infosys wanted to change that. But the challenge for companies like Infosys was that every business leader looked at from business value perspective, whereas the predominant propositions were driven by technology skill sets and quality metrics. So Software Engineering Technology Labs decided to create a group of specialists who would translate the value proposition for the senior leadership, typically the CIO, the COO, and the CEO. And years later, after I got hired, I realized that one of the things that they had in the job description was someone with an experience with firms like Gartner. Was one of the things that they had in their job in their interview brief.
Right.
And so when I interviewed with them, they had always that had at the back of their mind. Most of the interviews or questions were about how do you actually identify trends? How do you articulate value propositions? How do you make do you become an opinion maker, right? As a thought leader, how do you make change happen? Right. And so that's what got me into Software Engineering Technology Labs. And that was daunting because there were on my peer group, there were people with PhDs, who had written papers, who speak in international conferences, who are considered to be the authorities in their specialist fields. And here comes somebody who is a writer, analyst, thought leader. And so fitting in was initially challenging to a point, but then like everything else, I always felt that I could do.
I'm seeing the trend or a pattern there, George. Like you growing up, it might have happened a bit more organically to you or where you had no control, but you seem to thrive in those situations where you're thrust into the deep end or you're thrust into an unknown, so to say, which is completely in contrast with, what probably you bring to the table, right? And you seem to make that your own. I see that consistently as a pattern so far.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, absolutely. And because I enjoy newer things or the pointy end of the thing that I'm working in, right?
Right.
It's like status quo bothers me. If somebody gave me and said, here is a process, here is a department, here is a business that's been running like for the last 20 years, take and run it, I probably get bored. I can't do the hamster wheel, rinse, repeat kind of thing. But if you ask me to sort of say, build a new business or build a new product or build a new market for me, and that will be of interest to me because I think that keeps me curious. So one of the things you'll find in my career for the last 30 years is that I've always taken up jobs that were startup in nature. That could be part of a large organization, but a startup role. So Infosys was that. Gartner was that because I was probably the first analyst that they ever hired in India. Now they probably have 25 people.
Correct.
In journalism, I was probably one of the few that they hired who was an engineer.
Correct.
Into journalism. Wherever there is any startup role where you don't know, it's not set in stone, it's not kind of concrete yet, the plan is not concrete, that's where I thrive the best. And
Absolutely.
I look for those opportunities.
And one of the hashtags I always use for us, George, is forge new paths. And that's literally what I'm hearing here. You've always been forging new paths, so creating new paths in a way.
Correct. Make your own way has always been I know it's a Mazda tagline, but one of the cars. But
that's okay. Forge new paths is our tagline, so we'll stick with that.
So yeah. That's right.
Fantastic. There are many more facets to your journey, but before we go there, what I want to do is I have a little bit of a rapid fire that I'll do. Here we might be touching upon parts of what you're doing now, but that's okay. We'll try to keep this as rapid and as quick as possible. What comes to your mind first? That's about it. All right. African, Indian, or Aussie cuisine? What brings you most comfort?
Aussie.
Aussie cuisine. Fantastic. Okay. Anything specific in that?
I like the fact that it's simple. It's not very spicy, and it's not simple. Few ingredients, fresh, made uniquely. So I think that's what I'll go for.
Awesome.
Yeah, because in Indian food, to really enjoy Indian food, you actually have to spend quite a bit of preparation to basically meticulously prepare it. And you can have an avocado toast with an egg slapped on top. It tastes, gorgeous. It can actually it tastes good. The flavors are up there. I really enjoy that.
Beautiful. Writing a book or hosting a podcast? What is more exciting? What is more difficult?
I think both are interesting and exciting, and I've done both. So writing a book, I wrote 2 books. My second one was a lot easier than the first one because we had more tools and more, technology available, which actually helped us do that. Right. Podcast has been a new thing. I'm really enjoying the podcast that I'm doing at the moment. And that was a new experience as well. And I realized that there's a lot of, and in both, there is that journalist curiosity, the analyst thinking, the opinion making, and the framing of opinions, and all of that has really helped in both. So there is that skill set that I've kind of developed myself in early years of my life, plus the exposure of having actually done things in the latter years of my career as a consultant and an analyst and a product manager and what have you. That's really added to the scale, the breadth of experience, which actually helps.
Correct. Absolutely. All right. You answered this, but I'll ask this nonetheless. The absolute hardest part of being homeschooled?
I think the hardest part, in part, was the fact that you didn't have too many friends of the same age group within the same age bracket. And it was all largely dependent on where we were at that time. But yeah, so that probably would have been the hardest part. Yeah. Otherwise, I enjoyed everything.
Fantastic. A tech trend from the 90s that you secretly miss? Obviously, what that means is it's already gone, but yeah.
I think there were fewer things to track in the 90s. At the moment, it's a chaotic, because, there was always, Intel was on the top when it just came to processors. If you knew Intel, you knew the whole story. And then AMD came in and did things, messed up a few things. All the PCs versus servers, for example, it is all defined in terms of where they stood. But at the moment, it's all interconnected. There is Snowflake and this and that, and I can't keep track of everyone.
I'll tell you one that I miss. The days of floppy, when one used to be the 5.5 inches, I forget the exact terms, and the other one would be 3. When you would carry a 3, that would be sleek, and that was a symbol of, like you have the 3-inch. In a way, I miss those, like it would be bad in those days because sometimes you could not afford the shinier toy. But I miss those things in a way. Or Walkman for that matter. You would have these thick Walkmans and you would have these sleek Walkmans, and
yeah. If you don't hold that against me, I used to have a Palm Pilot.
There you go. See, perfect tool to have, especially as a journo and an analyst at that point. Right. Talk about it. Awesome. Okay. One word to describe the current state of AI, artificial intelligence.
At the moment, it's confusing.
Okay.
It's that's how I'd put it at the moment. It's a lot of people are confused at the moment. There is also poor messaging on the part of the leadership from where AI is being developed in terms of what it can do. And I think people are hearing mixed messages and they're starting to fear AI as opposed to embracing it. And I think it needs to come together. In fact, my latest podcast is on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be talking about that shortly as well. The corporate buzzword that makes you roll your eyes, like, what's this?
Look, I think actually most of it, all hands meetings, I think are meaningless,
There's a tick in the box more than anything else. You just have to do it once every quarter, so do it.
And you need to be there, and that's basically, showing your face to feel important and so on. And that never sat well with me. And I love to make change and impact to the customers without having the corporate politicking, if you know what that means. So I like to be the silent achiever as opposed to being in the limelight of things. And I think that goes back to how I used to get my scoops when I was in journalism. Always have one-on-one conversations, and that's where you get work done and not flashy,
not in overexposed
areas.
So you're surely not one of those who would raise your hand and ask a very smart question in a gathering of 1,000 people.
Definitely not. And I've never done that. I never saw that as to be anything of consequential. I know maybe that's how, corporations work in terms of visibility, but I never saw that as that. I like to be the quiet achiever.
And that's how I always have known you, George. Best piece of career advice you have ever received?
The best piece of career advice I've ever received was to embrace change as much as I can, and don't measure your current position based on your past experience. Always try and see the new and the opportunity that you see. I've never found, I think the other piece is also culture, in terms of, I think, at least now, is the people I work with is more important than the company I work for. And there was a time when brands really appealed to me. And fortunately for my career journey, I've worked with some significant companies. But to me, at the moment, it's the people I work with, the culture that I am within is of significant importance to me. So the career advice that I've received was, it's about culture, context, and competence. And I think you need to have people who are very competent around you, who are better than you, actually. Then only you learn something. Otherwise, you become complacent. That's the fourth C.
That's the fourth C you don't want. You want the first three, but not the last one. Beautiful. And
but not the last
chance, do you remember who gave you that advice?
It's stuff that I picked up along the way.
Okay.
I would think.
Okay.
And there is one recollection. I used to have at one point in time the mentor, the vice admiral for the Indian Navy. It was number 2 in command. It was a Commodore. Mm-hmm. He told me that I should be, or generally we should all be truthful to yourself, because if you're not, then you pretend, you basically get sucked into the mold that others will want to fit you into. So
right.
I think that was sound advice at that point.
That's beautiful. Absolutely. Very sound advice. The ultimate go-to stress buster after you have had a long week of consulting and analysis and podcasting and all that. What do you do to let your hair loose?
I've done different things at different points in time. So I've done bike riding, listening to music, and then going for long walks with my wife, take the dog out for a walk. I don't have a set thing that I do. Mm-hmm. At the moment, the stress buster for me is to, watch the news and then be on my exercise bike, but also lift weights at the same time.
The bike and the news I can relate to. So you're saying you're doing that, and at the same time you have weights that you're exercising your brain, your legs, and your hands, everything together.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I'll be watching a TV program and I will be on my exercise bike, doing my exercise thing. And I will also have weights that I'll be lifting with my hands. So that's my current thing.
Is this again one of the things you're doing ahead of your time, or is this something that's already being done by people?
I have no idea. My son says that, I'm crazy to do it. There's no method or anything in it, but I really enjoy doing that. But the other thing I really enjoy doing is basically look after my plants. I've got a number of plants at home. Mm-hmm. As you can see, I've got just one here, and another one there. But I do have an interest in gardening, outside and inside. And I think part of it comes from my brother, who's an agriculture scientist, who's always there to give some advice if I need it. And a lot of my plants are hydroponic.
Okay. So that's probably another conversation for another time to learn a bit more. This must be a physical print book or Kindle. What do you prefer? How do you read?
Unfortunately, my reading habit has gone for a toss, but I would prefer to have a device at the moment, and sometimes a book. Like if I'm going on a holiday, I will take a book with me. Mm-hmm. But because I'm on the move and my interest shifts quite rapidly, having something on my phone is what I would normally prefer.
Sure. I think you're absolutely right. It's getting to that point. And honestly, it's books, podcasts are the new books in a way these days, because people, even instead of a complete full book, people want the episodes that you want to listen to on your go. And that is a good hook to your podcast itself. And we'll come to that in a bit. But I hear you, it's the tech is replacing the physical print in a way. We're coming to the end part of this, but one piece of technology you cannot live without today. I don't mean to say phone or something, but I think
it's the phone.
The phone itself? You just say that?
Yeah, look, I thought it was the phone, but if you look at deeper than that, I think it's the tools that you use for different things. Like, for example, at the moment, the tool that I love the most is obviously the writing tools that I have. Microsoft Word being the basic, but then new tools coming up. So I won't stick myself to a particular tool as such that I can't live out with. I think the phone still remains the most important piece of technology that.
Absolutely. I mean, from a
I don't know
hardware
why it's called a
perspective,
phone
yes,
though.
but I know, right? The phone. The funny part is the phone is an app on it. We still call it a phone.
Yeah, that's why I don't know why we call it a phone, because I
We call
do
it a phone.
hardly do any calling on it anymore. It's mostly text.
So a bit of
Yeah.
a slightly different question, George. If you were not a journo, if you were not an analyst, if you were not the digital AI evangelist that you are, what would you have been?
I think I would have been a farmer, a good kind.
Working with your brother?
Like, love to produce food, at affordable prices, which are organic in nature. That's probably what I would have done. The other thing I've always thought about is I would have loved to be a travel blogger. Much thought behind it, but I've always enjoyed the fact that if you had a job that paid for yourself while you're actually in different places, that would probably be the ideal other alternate job that I would have done.
Fantastic. And there is still enough time for that, George. So maybe the next decade of transformation that comes to you should be the travel blogger part. All right.
Correct. You never know.
I'm going to use this as a segue to our next part, but let me ask these two questions and then we'll go there. One word to describe the feeling when you held your first published book in your hand.
Oh, excitement.
Excitement, like relief in a way, or
I
just
think,
excitement that.
It was basically mixed. I think now, coming to think about it, it was basically because I took 5 years to write my first book. So there was excitement that there was something finally published, but the process through which I went through was not very, very pleasant because of the back and forth, and you had to work through a publisher, and the publisher has got their own ways of doing things and what have you. But there was to your point, yes, there was relief, and then there was excitement. Then now you become a published author. So
The
you
relief would have
crossing
probably come
till
before
you have a book written. You don't.
Yeah.
Correct.
The relief would have been
So,
probably when it's all done. But when you hold the physical copy for the first time, it will be excitement. And
that's right.
Beautiful. One last question, and then we'll take a segue directly into that. One book that you would suggest that everyone should read. Of course, you have two of your own, so we're keeping that aside. Those are must reads. But one book that you would suggest.
There are quite a few, actually. I mean, look, I'm not reading any particular book at the moment. As you've said before, I'm not, I don't go after titles anymore. I do listen to a collection of podcasts and things. I think one book that I read a lot is the Bible. I've always read it. I've always relied on it. And so I know for different people it's different things, but I find that fascinating that it still retains some of its currency.
It's interesting that you mentioned that. And pardon me for an uninitiated question, but when you say you read the Bible, are there like different experts have said something, you read that, or you just read the original Bible, the manuscript itself? Because, at different phases in life, you get different interpretations and meanings out of it. Because I see that with Bhagavad Gita, like when I read the Bhagavad Gita, you, depending on your frame of mind, depending on your own gathered experiences, you make different meanings out of it every time.
Yeah, correct. I think it's a mix for the Bible as well. So one of the things I find is that, of course, I'm not trained to read the original manuscript. So you're basically reading translations of it. And so there are various translations that point to the original. So there will be like 15 different versions of it. Part of the reason why I also mentioned the Bible is also the preservation of the current versions that you have. So when you look at books, and if you're interested in literature, and if you looked at how books have impacts on people, I think that's where the Bible sits, at least to me, at a different level. It's also because of the 140 authors that it's got. They never spoke to each other, but there's also a consistent theme that it tries to build and so on. So to answer your question, you're right. I mean, it also, the meaning changes from different perspectives that you look into it as well. So there is that similarity in how you describe that. When you read it different times, you get different meanings. But there is also a theme that it tries to communicate, and so everyone has been trying to figure that out for years, and so people have different interpretation of what that theme is. But I find that fascinating that it still continues to be transcultural and transitionary across multiple times,
generations, regions.
That's why I find that still fascinating, which is why correct. And it's also transcultural. It also appeals to different. So reading it often, because you can't never exhaust it, right? Because unless you make that, a student passion of yours. But I still find the Bible to be an interesting piece of literature.
Literature.
And more than that, as a book as well. So that, of course, there is personal meaning that you derive from it. And then that's helped me.
The ultimate guide at all times. Absolutely. Absolutely. Beautiful. So that gives us
Correct.
a
You need some
segue.
reference point of some sort. Yeah.
That gives us a good segue, George, to talk about the book itself. Like, one consistent theme I'm seeing is that every decade there is a change. And if 2000s was your entry into the world of IT and the consulting world in that sense with Infosys, come 2010s, you had a different part going on for you, and you had your first published book, which you also briefly spoke about. So walk us through that journey. And that's a very interesting title you had as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, my first book was on was titled India's Innovation Blueprint, which was a attempt from my end to basically paint how, as a country, as a nation, we were trying to develop at the grassroots level, from a rural development perspective. And there was always a gap that you find in between the urban population and the rural population, and how to close that gap, and what are the things that you need to look at. And so, interestingly, I use examples like electricity. It took 100 years for 100% electric, or more than 100 years for 100% electrification to be achieved globally in some of the reference countries. We look at the developed world, and sometimes are amazed at the pace at which they have achieved what they have achieved. But then they were all independent nations as such, and so we, as a country, were probably, at the time of writing the book, I think we were just about 60 years post-independence of being a sovereign nation. So there were challenges in terms of the pace at which we were going, the population size, the diversity. I think we had some, at that time when I was doing my research, we had about 650,000 villages which are disconnected from infrastructure and what have you. So the reason for that book was to paint a picture of hope, in a sense, to say that, look, all that you see needs to be seen from a perspective. And my training or my work at that time was driving innovation and change using technology. So using those principles and adapting and scaling that at a national level was what I did. So I came up with a national innovation framework in the book as a prescription for us to look at the different eras of our transition as a nation, and then how do we actually focus on the key things like education, healthcare, GDP, and how do you make, by rural GDP, and how do you help local population to have a livelihood, and so on and so forth. And then how do you also become globally competitive? And so, a framework that helped you look at it from a holistic perspective. And I projected that, I think 2035 is when, I said that India could basically become an innovation superpower if we actually kept on track in terms of where we were what we were doing in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, which is roughly the time frame
when you wrote the book. And how do you see it now when you with the insights or the experience that you have over the past 15, 20 years? How do you see your predictions that you had made there? Is India on the track there?
Look, so on several macro levels, yes, but on the micro levels, there are still challenges that you face. And I think one of the challenges that we have as a nation is also that the development agenda, the primary agenda to progress on the building blocks that you have already laid, that gets missed out in our 5-year plan every time it changes because of different leadership and different philosophies and what have you. So if we can have that on a sustained basis, saying that we would look at infrastructure as a primary need, irrespective of where you are in the country, you will still have water out of the tap that you can drink as safe as a benchmark. If you put those as a minimum set of goals and be consistent that irrespective of whoever comes in leadership and whatever policies you come up, then we would be able to achieve that a lot faster. But our challenge has been to have a consistent view of what development means for different stages of our. So from that perspective, there are gaps. But I'm so excited about the young people that we have who've got all the tools that they're raring to go, and they're not stereotyped like we were. And when we were graduating, it was either engineer, doctor, or whatever, and those stereotypical professions.
Right.
Some of us took it because of love for science and engineering, but a lot of people got kind of straitjacketed into those roles. Whereas our young people these days have got tremendous opportunities, they've got tools, and I think the hope that is in those young people. And that's one of the things I talk about in the book as well, in terms of what they can achieve and how they think differently to some of us because they are globally connected.
Absolutely,
resourced.
absolutely. So that was an interesting first for you with that book, and then you have a second book that has come out now after 15 years, and we'll come to that briefly as well. But in the interim as well, there have been quite a few things that you have done, George. Which during my interaction, and that's when we started interacting as well. During my interaction, I came about in terms of what you do from a social service perspective. You're on the boards of a couple of companies. How does that journey start? Was this a natural progression, or was this some passion that you had in you that you were trying to give wings?
Yeah, definitely. So the first board position that I had was on an educational technology company out of Sydney, which was started by a bunch of young people who went on a backpacking trip to Bangalore and in India, and they felt passionate about education being that key thing that you drive to make those changes. And at that time, when I met them, I think in 2000, around the time I published the book, it strongly resonated with what I was saying and talking about in the book, that education is a fundamental need of society. And if every child is educated, then the pace at which you develop and change is significant. And so the startup was in that space. And so they saw my book and my scholarship in that area to be valuable for their company's progress or the startup's progress. And that's how I served on the board of that company, which was called 40K initially, and then it became Plus Education for about 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Till a point that where I could hand it over to a more competent board. So that was my first board experience. And ever since, I've also been on other boards that really looked at community or social development as their primary goals. And even now, I support a charity in Mumbai that works among other destitute children and helping them to basically equip them with training, character, and other inputs and coaching, particularly to help them be successful in life. And I do build AI-based systems for them. And so I'm involved in one way or the other in those kind of things, because I think there's a point in line where you have to start giving and not just taking and receiving. And so I think that for me happened around the time I wrote the book, and therefore I've spent a lot of time in actually giving back.
Beautiful. And what a beautiful thought that you put in there, that you get a lot more by giving, and you get to a point where you use all that you have acquired, which is essentially to a great extent knowledge here, that you're now looking to give back. And this in this journey, your inherent spirit of trying to be at the edge is not lost either. So when we used to work, it used to be digital and mobile. Of course, in the technology world, that has now been replaced by the word AI. And we see that you're at the forefront of that as well. And you're trying a few new things too. You talked about at the start that you're now working for yourself, and you do that. Help us understand that aspect a bit. Was this more a natural transition for you, or was this coming from areas of experience that you want to now share with the broader audience?
Yeah, I think it's a transition, progression for me. It's a progressive step for me in terms of what I do at the moment. But then my career has shaped me to a point where I think it meets the basic needs that you probably have aspirations to work towards. And then like I said before, there's a point at which you start to then give more than you take. And so I've reached that kind of point from my career perspective, rich experience over 25 to 30 years in multiple areas, multiple geographies, multiple markets, multiple technologies, multiple companies. And so you have the opportunity now to basically choose also to whom and where you give that. And so my current business is really focused on allowing me to work with some of those projects that I'm passionate about and industries that I'm passionate about, as opposed to having the need to be, working for someone or being part of an organized structure.
Correct.
So that's the driving force behind what I'm doing currently. But you're absolutely right. There is a consistent theme in that I've always looked at being at the pointy end of things, where it's status quo, it bores me. So I look for things where I can actually create new value, new markets, new products, new opportunities. And so in that sense, this whole new business is also one way of doing that. In saying that, I have to also clarify that when I say new business, I've been doing, independent consulting for over many years now, but I have taken full-time. The consulting I would do was full-time for a particular company. So I worked with Cochlear for 2 years and then with Lex for 6 years. So I blocked my 9 to 5 to one particular company. Whereas what the difference that I'm focused on at the moment is basically that I give myself to different companies, a portion of me, which is a fractional part of what I do. And that's the difference in what I've been doing for the last 1 year. And I think that came out of two things. One is a natural progression. The second is that I find myself being more valuable that way to companies. So first of all, from an affordability perspective, as well as from my perspective, to be able to have a variety of opportunities to contribute to, as opposed to just commit myself to one organization. And following that track. So I think that's a motivation behind what I'm doing.
So George, I'm tempted to ask on a lighter note. So when you say you give a portion of yourself, is there like a gem.ai that you have created, which is like, subscribe to this for a while and you're getting a piece of George or something like that? Lighter note.
Yeah, you could think about it that way, because the fractional consulting is basically that. You basically give all of yourself to an output, an outcome, as opposed to all of what the company stands for.
Correct.
So being specific to that and give all to that particular space. Yes. So and they're subscribing to that part of me. Yes.
To that part of you. Yeah, fair enough. But in that part, we have noticed that there are two new entries into that, right? One is your new book, and second is also the podcast that you have started as another way through which people engage with you. Tell us a bit about that. How's that journey been? Right. And then I want we can have some exchanges from one podcaster to another to gain some tips.
I think the book was really, the second book was really about a encapsulation of my experience in the last 6 years and being in a startup called Lex, which fundamentally was a native AI software company that was trying to build a knowledge management system for troubleshooting of airplanes and ships and wind turbines and whatnot. And that was their focus. And my role there was to take that concept and code to market, to build a product around it, position it, and then make it successful in the market. And I've done that. And I know we used to work in the earlier versions of GPT, even before ChatGPT became famous in 2023. We started working with GPT technologies much earlier than and building that kind of experience, very focused on the domains that we were working in. And so I always had a lead, and the team and I that I worked at Lex had always had a lead in that space. And so I felt that I needed to share that experience, especially now people are talking about pilots and so on and so forth. We used to do pilots back in 2019. And for me, of all the about 20 to 30 different pilots that I've done, I've been able to successfully scale a good percentage of that. I probably have a better track record than many of the companies doing pilots at the moment. So I wanted to share that information, and that's where the book became part of. That became a book. And then I also realized that the large companies have deep pockets to engage, senior consultants, whereas the medium and the medium segment of the business, of the industry, I should say, do not have that capability. So I said I should be more valuable to them because of their need to basically scale up as well with a technology like that. That's how the second book came into being. And the podcast was basically a way of another channel, another medium, because people consume content differently these days, as we said before. And how do we actually make, yourself valuable to people's process and thinking and so on. And so I call my book The Complete AI Guide, but essentially the book is just one platform. The Complete AI Guide is basically all of me. So there's a book, the website that I have, the newsletters that I run on LinkedIn, on Substack, and the podcast. So that's the Complete AI Guide. And so I'm able to, the book is a point in time kind of intervention to package all that knowledge and experience, but I've never stopped learning, right? So that's the last 6 years and experience. That's a book. And then I've built around that in terms of the new developments that have happened since. Correct. And the platforms that I serve today sort of completes that whole focus specifically for small and medium businesses, because that's where my passion is at the moment in terms of being able to make a difference, because they're the ones that need a lot of help at the moment. The large companies they have deep pockets and, they can actually buy these expertise from very many places, but the medium, small businesses cannot.
Absolutely. And they are the engine as well. They are truly the engine of any country or economy in a way. Absolutely. And so I'm tempted to ask this, right? So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to also say that, it's not just small, medium business. I also work sometimes on pro bono basis for charitable organizations that don't have the resources to do that. So the whole model in which I work is that if I can get clients who pay for my time and my expertise to keep updated and whatnot, then I can actually do more of the work on a pro bono basis for companies like SMI, the company NGO that I work in Mumbai, for instance, or others here in Australia that I can't name for now because I'm in a confidential arrangements with them.
Absolutely.
So that's what I want to do more of. And so the more clients that I have in my fractional business, that will then help me to support. So that's really have kind of shaped myself. So it's all about a balance in life, I would think, the stage of
Mhm.
life.
Yeah.
It's not just, take, but also give, balancing that in such a way, and be able to do it from anywhere in the world if I can.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the technology world that we live in, where most of the things you should be able to do
That's
from
right.
wherever, unless of course you talked about your passion of becoming sorry, what's it that you had said? You want to become a travel blogger. That's one thing you can't do from anywhere in the world. You literally have to be in that part of the world. All right.
Correct.
As we come to the concluding part, George, I am tempted to ask you this. With whatever I know of you from this podcast and even earlier, you're always at the cutting edge and at the edge, which we have established. AI is not that edge today. AI has already happened. So, what do you see as a new edge? What is a new frontier?
I think a whole bunch of things are changing even within AI. AI is too broad a term or an umbrella to
Correct.
stand under. So there are multiple pieces of the puzzle. I think a lot of things that we saw in the digital .com era is happening in the AI space. I know everyone is talking about OpenClaw now, which is pretty much becoming the operating system, open source piece of technology that allows you to kind of, develop and rapidly deploy agents. Till last year, October, November, December, nobody knew what OpenClaw was. But today, everyone is talking about OpenClaw. They're talking about agentic AI. Everyone is talking about it. Nobody started seriously looking at it because we still have a lot of issues around it to be solved. So there is always going to be that, and you still remember, nobody talks about cloud anymore because cloud is passing age. It's kind of standard.
Yeah.
But then when cloud was there was, there's virtualization and there was what is that called? Grid computing and what have you. You've seen all these changes through life. And so if you've been long enough in this industry, you see there's a pattern emerging out of all of this. So AI as a concept, everyone got excited with ChatGPT because they were the most successful in tapping the consumer mindset and the consumer consciousness. That doesn't mean that they are the default AI, custodians. There's a whole raft of areas. So if you look at it depends on the nook and cranny that you want to focus on. There's a lot of changes happening in different spaces. Autonomous agents coming in is exciting, but it's also fraught with a lot of dangers. You don't want your email system to start emailing a bunch of people that you don't want to email. You don't want your credit. I just heard yesterday that someone's credit card was maxed because it was linked to an agent that went rogue. So you don't want that to happen, right?
That to happen, yeah.
So there's a lot of those, and there's a lot of training and education that needs to happen as well, right? I mean, there was a case about a few months ago, where Samsung engineers uploaded all their confidential blueprints for their upcoming products onto ChatGPT, and you don't want to do that, right?
Correct.
This is a large company, established company doing that. And so there's a whole bunch of things around training, coaching, mentoring from the board level, from executive management, from people who are employees, people like you and I who are, who run homes and part of a family and community and whatnot. There's a whole raft of things to be educated on, but people are also seeing it from a point of view of fear. Because if you remember the .com and the internet era, people treated that era similar. But here the scale is much bigger because, it's getting into the comfort zones of a lot of knowledge workers. And so there is that additional layer of fear and anxiety.
And I remember, when in the 2010s, when we were working together, there was the whole mobile first or digital first kind of a era where the kids at that time who were just entering the workforce also were very mobile savvy or digital savvy. So you needed everything catered to them, which was still okay. But what I feel that now the Gen Zs, as they are entering the workforce, were AI savvy in a way, that does cause this concern because they need to have that delimitation, which is alien to them, that everything that they have at their disposal cannot go onto an AI. So, you have to draw those boundaries, which is kind of difficult at times, with the way the generation is. Beautiful. We have almost come to the concluding part, George. I'm tempted to ask you this. Okay, before I ask that part, firstly, ever made a trip back to Ethiopia and Nigeria with family, especially to go back and see that place where you grew up?
Not yet. I want to, and I would love to, but I think some of the places that we used to live are not safe to go at the moment, especially in Nigeria. So that's a concern. But if at all there's an opportunity, I would love to go back. But I still stay in touch with the culture. I don't have contacts. I mean, it is not the time when we had social media. So I still try and look to identify kids I went to school with in that year 2 and year 3 I talked about. I try to locate my old school, but neighborhood. I try and look at videos of other bloggers and vloggers to see whether those buildings still stand. And sometimes I find that they're still there. So that's interesting. But I keep in touch with people there and have chit chats whenever I get to meet an Ethiopian or a Nigerian and have a conversation.
Sure. No, wonderful. So we'll just hope that your video blogging or travel vlogger journey starts with something as exciting as that, and we'll keep looking forward to that. One ending question that I have to ask is, change has been the only constant in your life. So are you happy with the changes that you have seen? What more do you expect to see? Do you have a crystal ball?
I don't. I think I'm also very comfortable with taking life as it comes at the moment. That's what I was saying at the beginning itself. If somebody asked me how do I introduce myself, I think I value the roles outside of work more. See, I think we are rightly called human beings and not human doings for a reason. So there was a time when work defined who I was. At the moment, it doesn't. And so that decoupling was painful at some stage of my career. But now that I have decoupled myself and moved to the other side where I'm building more of my being and who I am and being able to be part of society from that perspective for the betterment of society, I think I'm content with that. And I've always been content along the way, but there were pockets where, you become competitive or try to growth itself gets new meaning and different perspectives. But I think on the other side, when you look at what defines you as a person, it's not your work, it's not the wealth, it's not your status, it's not any of that, but it's about who you are as a person. And so I think from that perspective, I'm very content with where I am. Therefore, what next? I think more of that, I would think. And
more of the giving,
less of the rat race if I can, because that's right. Because someone said, if you're in a rat race, even if you win the race, you still are a rat. So I'm out of that. And so how do you kind of build, a sense of community, sense of who you are as a person, help people, support others in their journeys? Because I wish I had some of that help when I was younger. So how do we build? So that's really where my passion is at the moment.
And that part of what you said is still stuck with me. So all I can say is that gems cannot be rats. So out of the rat race. Wonderful. On that note, I think, George, I would like to thank you. Thank you so very much for spending time with us, for walking us through this fascinating journey. And as you rightly put it as well, what stands out is that change is the only constant. And how do you weather that change at all times? That's probably the biggest lesson that I've learned in our conversation. So once again, thank you for spending time with us.
Thanks, Sanjeev, for having me. It was a pleasure having this conversation with you. I really enjoyed this this chat, and I hope all the best. I wish you all the best in your journey as well.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And to all our friends, we'll be back with another exciting journey, another cool journey where we learn more fascinating stories about passionate people. Thank you and stay tuned.